Welcome to And She Thrived, which is a website that serves to hold space for Muslim divorced women. And today we have Iman Boundaoui, who is our distinguished guest today. Alhamdulillah, we're very happy to have her. Very accomplished woman, mashallah. Welcome, Iman.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here.
Thank you for joining us from Cairo. Are you in Cairo right now?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, great. So what we do with And She Thrived is that it serves to have Muslim divorced women offer to contribute any type of expression that they would want, whether it's in the written word, whether it's in poetry, or whether it's through artwork. But at the same time, we also do interviews such as these because we find that there are these women, such as yourself, who are so accomplished and have had so much experience, whether they are healing practitioners themselves or have gone through a divorce. And I think that it's extremely important for us to form community and help each other as much as possible. So thank you so much for being with us. I'm going to just mention a bit about Iman's background. Iman is a somatic practitioner and facilitator with a deep commitment to working with individuals and communities to heal and transform collective, intergenerational, and politicized trauma. As a practitioner, she grounds in her indigenous North African cultural and spiritual wisdom lineages and draws from traditional African-Sufi healing and embodiment practices, which she resources from in her own life and healing. In addition to that, Iman is also an attorney and has practiced as a social impact litigator, civil rights litigator, and immigrants' rights activist and organizer, working with individuals, communities, and social justice organizations to curb the impact of state-sponsored discrimination and corrosive profit-driven corporate behavior and policy. Wow, mashallah. So shall we just jump into our questions, shall we?
That sounds good.
Okay, so I actually requested an interview with you based on your experience before I even knew that you yourself have been through a divorce as well. So that led me to the question that, has your personal divorce journey impacted your decision to enter into the field of work that you do right now?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think I can say that any part of my personal life is separate from my journey as a practitioner, that my own healing journey is really what motivated and inspired me to become a practitioner and to work with women through their own trauma. I think if I think about my particular divorce experience, so much of the pain I experienced, the challenge that I experienced around it, had very much to do with the way that I was shaped as a woman to not believe in myself and not trust myself, not trust in my own sense of courage, my intuition, my instincts that were telling me that something was off, something was wrong. And instead, this cultural training around being patient, forgiveness, the way that women are culturally trained to look the other way, to excuse bad behavior. All of that was deeply part of my journey through marriage and divorce. And a lot of that became the impetus for my healing. How do I trust myself again as a woman? How do I listen to my instincts when they're telling me that something is wrong? How do I trust those instincts and those feelings when they do arise? How do I turn to myself as a source of wisdom rather than always looking outside of myself for answers or for guidance? And so it's very much related to my healing path, and also related to now what I offer women. So much of the healing that I work with and that I offer is around how do we transform our own embodiment of patriarchal norms, like putting ourselves second and putting men first, like distrusting our instinct or believing somehow that reason You know, having good reasoned arguments for something are somehow superior to instinctual knowledge. So healing from this embodiment is a huge part of how I support women in their healing journey and in their journey of discovering themselves.
Thank you. So I thought about these questions from the perspective of asking you as a healer, but I'm sure that you know, you've been through the same process yourself. So you can take this in any direction that you want. So you can contribute, share as much as you want from your personal experience. But if you feel that you just want to keep it from, you know, sitting in your the healer with the healer hat, that's fine too.
Mm-hmm.
Because my question would be that, because you obviously went through an entire process that led you from that divorce point where it was, I'm sure, was a very low point, to how you became more self-aware and embarked upon this path that you were on. So what do you think are the biggest issues that women face in general post-divorce?
Hmm.
So you of course welcome to mention, you know, you can mention your own experience, but if you just want to keep it, you know.
Sure. I mean, if I, you know, maybe generalize or think about my own experience or the experience of women in my community, one of the first thing that comes to mind is that one challenge is that women somehow feel the need to justify or explain the reasons for their divorce, as if there are good reasons and there are bad reasons. Which is really interesting. We somehow have decided as a society that it's generally good for a woman to be married, that it's a thing that we sort of admire, and that there is a fall from grace that happens when a woman divorces. And we're only willing to accept this fall from grace if there was a really good reason for it. And then there is this sort of hidden manual that mostly men have decided on, mostly the patriarchy has decided what are good reasons for a woman to be out of this state of grace. And women having to contend with that, I find really challenging. Women having to explain to their family, to their community, to friends, to outsiders, to strangers, trying to sift through this invisible manual and point to, well, reason number 28 is the reason that I got divorced. And we as a society have accepted, you know, reason number 28 as a valid reason for a woman to be divorced. And this is really corrosive, because I think it actually takes away from the nuance of why women divorce, why women leave men, for the multitude and diverse reasons that they do, for the same reasons that men divorce. It makes it simplifies the discussion to a degree that I find quite ignorant. And it actually takes away, I believe, from a woman's own ability to process what happened to her. If we're forcing women to like tell us in one little snippet, you know, what's your elevator pitch for why you got divorced? Everybody wants to hear your elevator pitch in 1 to 2 sentences, right? And then people really are just looking for the, okay, that's a good reason. I'm glad, I'm happy for you. And it takes away from the complexity, actually, of what's happening and the nuance. And from a woman being able to process for herself, what happened here? What are all of the reasons? What are my reasons? Not the socially acceptable reasons, but the reasons that, for me, felt valid. That's one challenge I find. I think another challenge is something around shame. And I think it's similarly related to this fall from grace. Again, we've sort of, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you can still hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. Again, this, you know, this idea that women are are better off inside of marriage, and this space where women exist outside of marriage must be a space of shame or sorrow or sadness. And then generally women have to contend with that. And in fact, if we created a little bit more room and we were a little bit more creative and imaginative, we could imagine many, many, many scenarios in which the space outside of the marriage is a delightful one and is a happy one, and is something to be celebrated for a woman to take herself outside of an unhappy situation. But in fact, there's such social pressure to be sad about it. There's such social pressure to be disappointed or to somehow grieve it. Which is not to say that that's not always the case, right? That there are many women who grieve their divorces and have a hard time, and that there is a stage of grief and unhappiness, but we can't be so one-dimensional in how we understand a woman's state outside of that. And I think this one-dimensionality, again, forces women to contend with, oh, wow, I'm actually really happy that I got divorced, but somehow I have to pretend that I'm sad, or pretend that I'm disappointed. And again, that creates a little bit of disillusionment, I think, and confusion in the healing process. If we just created space for women to heal as they need, to grieve as they wish, and to celebrate as they desire, we'd see that the stories of divorce are plenty. They're diverse. They're not one-dimensional. And I think we'd appreciate even more a little bit about the diversity of women, and not just assuming that all women sort of walk the same path and have the same feelings and have the same experiences. So I think that's another thing women have to contend with, is like, instead of having my own experience, I feel like I have to find the box that I fit in and fit myself into that. And it takes away from my process, and it's inauthentic, and it's not truthful, and it's dishonest. And I feel that dishonesty often imposed on women in their healing process.
Great. Is anything else you want to add to that, apart from
Sorry.
having to justify, and then also the sense of shame? Can you hear me, Iman? Can you hear me? Okay. Yes, is anything that you wanted to add to the justifying, having to justify, and the sense of shame? I think that those are the main two issues that women in general face post-divorce.
You know, I think some of the manifestations of that, so I think they're deeply connected to needing to justify shame. I think for the most part, all of this is rooted in shame. But like, you know, looking for another partner, and, you know, the road of love after divorce, the way that it tends to be filled with, again, women having to navigate, when do I tell the person that, you know, I've been divorced, or is it an appropriate time? Do they even deserve to know? Have they earned the right to understand and hear my story? Often women feel pressure to like put that out there right away, as if it's like, I had this chronic illness that I should tell you about, because if we're going to be partners, then you should know that, you know, I have a lifespan of 10 years in front of me. That's often how we treat divorce. Like it's a disease or an illness that we have to speak to right away, lest the person be surprised, you know, along the road of getting to know each other and courting, that you have this like disease that they didn't know about. It's like, oh, I wish you told me. And we don't treat it the way we treat other things. We don't treat it the way that we treat other parts of our life. We don't treat it the way we do other chapters of our existence, as if it's a scarlet letter, you know, that we carry around our entire lives. And yeah, that's again rooted in shame, I believe, but it makes this process of, you know, falling in love again and finding and looking for companionship and partnership challenging for women. I think women often carry around that shame, even though internally for themselves, they don't necessarily feel ashamed about having been married or divorced. But again,
do you think it's dependent on the culture one comes from? I asked this because I know my friend who lived in Mauritania for 8 years, and she said that there's absolutely no stigma whatsoever. They actually have a divorce party for the lady afterwards, and they put henna on her hands, and she said it's very common to see the ex-husband and the ex-wife standing in the street having a chat. And she said they'll actually go up a daraja in some way after you get divorced in some way. So, right. And that was so unusual for me to hear, you know. And then there are other situations and where you completely, like, you're written off. If you're, it's just that, sorry, like, your life is now ended. You will not have another chance. So, yes. So that might be then just, you know, contingent on the kind of cultural background one comes from.
Absolutely. I think we should be reclaiming, you know, these cultures that celebrate divorce, that celebrate a woman's liberty and freedom to choose whether she wants to be inside the confines of the confines of marriage, and when that no longer serves her. I wish more of our cultures, specifically speaking to Islamic cultures, followed these examples. I think women would be much happier.
It was very, I mean, if you study the prophetic society, in that it was very organic, and there was no such thing as a stigma. People married and got divorced very frequently, and it was not an issue. There was no scarlet letter. What I do notice, though, from your answers is that the two answers that you mentioned, which was the justifying and the shame, those are very like societal forces, like out, in. And you didn't really mention anything that's in, out, in a sense. And so that leads me to my next question, because it's always been my assumption as a divorcee myself, and speaking to many divorcees, that even if a woman, for example, was in a bad marriage, you know, or whether she chose it or whether she did not choose it, the divorce, it's still traumatic. It's very, very traumatic. Would you agree with that, or disagree, or if you have any comments on that?
You know, I'm generally careful with how I use the word trauma and traumatic. There's a particular definition of trauma that I subscribe to, and that is, trauma is not necessarily an event, but it's the way that we are impacted by an event, or the way that we are impacted by a condition or a challenge or an experience. And for the most part, what happens inside of traumatic impact, instead of just saying trauma, because we can't quite grasp what that means, but what happens when we are impacted in a traumatic way is that we get stuck in a fixed pattern of fight, flight, freeze, appeasement, or dissociation. These are 5 different survival strategies that the body takes on in order to survive a particular condition or an experience. And it can be a prolonged condition, or it could be a sudden experience. So depending on the circumstances of any particular separation, right? So if we just think about divorce in a simple way, it's like the separating of 2 people who are intimately and deeply connected. That separation absolutely can have a traumatic impact on the body. Now, if you layer in social conditions, like, for example, if a woman was reliant economically, financially on her partner, then this separation has even deeper implications. We're no longer just talking about the harm and the pain of an intimate separation, but also left with having to contend with, how do I now take care of myself? Yeah. How do I take care of myself financially, physically? So now we're talking about material safety. Yeah. We can also think about not just safety, but we can talk about sense of dignity. So sometimes we can think about like the unit of two people coming together as a sort of very dignified and beautiful thing that we celebrate. Yeah. And this, sometimes this separation, divorce can leave us feeling undignified in some ways. Like something is missing, or
You mean like you almost feel like you have a sense of protection by having a spouse?
yeah, I think beyond protection, there's you know, I think as humans, it's very natural for us to gravitate towards interdependence and companionship. I think we're built as a species to cooperate, to interdepend, to blend with another. And this sense of being left alone, or being in it alone in this really a challenging world and existence that we're in, not only leaves us feeling like a lack of safety, but also like, am I fulfilling my human experience? You know, like there is something deeply fulfilling about this coming together and cooperating with another. And on the other side, we have to contend with what it means for that to have not worked. Yeah. We have to grapple with what now? How do I move through life sort of on my own? And that's a painful experience. That's painful to contend with, to sit with a sense of aloneness in the world, to sit with, you know, companionship adds so much to our lives. And when that suddenly is no longer a place where we can pour some of our pain or our grief or our hurt, or just, you know, think through the existential questions that we're in, all of those things that companionship provides, we're now sort of left to our own devices. And that is a challenging position to be in. And there is some healing that has to happen for us to feel a sense of security and dignity on our own, so that we can sort of gather and collect ourselves and continue on this life journey and see if we're blessed with companionship, you know, in the future. So I think from the inside out, these are some of the things that material safety, a sense of emotional, intimate security that we derive from companionship. Just the general sort of dignity of companioning with another human being and cooperating with another human being, and the sense of purpose that can really imbue us with. And I will also finally say, you know, as human beings, we're really built for belonging, for connection. We need to belong to a tribe. We need to belong to a community. And similarly, it's really fulfilling for us to belong to another. And so there's a break in belonging, right? That's sort of very obvious, but it runs very deep. You know, this feeling, I'll just share from my own personal experience, like, am I lovable? You know, am I worthy of love? Why was it so hard to belong to this person? And why was it so hard for this person to belong to me? It's very natural for us when there's a break of belonging, whether a friendship falls apart or your mother stops speaking to you or whatever, we often turn the finger towards ourselves, and it's very natural to blame ourselves, to ask what's wrong with me. And so breaks in belonging are very existential. They have us really questioning who we are, what we're made of, whether we're worthy of love and connection, what we did wrong, what's wrong with us that this break of belonging happened. And there again is a lot of healing that has to happen for us to reconcile that in fact we can be deeply worthy of love and connection, and we are deeply worthy and inherently worthy of love and connection, and it's not always going to work. And a break of belonging doesn't necessarily say anything about us, that we're inherently bad or something is flawed or wrong or that we're unlovable. And we have to be able to reconcile this during the healing process.
Right. Thank you. When you were talking, I was thinking about how in Arabic, the word insan comes from Anisa Ya'nasu, which is to insan being the human being, and Anisa Ya'nasu to seek companionship or intimacy. And that's the inherent nature, as you were saying, as a human being. I think this would be a good point for you to share with us some information about the work that you do and how the work you do, could facilitate this process post-divorce. In terms of healing.
I think the best way for me to talk about my work is to embody it a little bit and exaggerate and show it in my body, because the work I practice is somatics and embodied transformation. And essentially what it gets to is we don't heal simply by imagining new narratives. Or creating new narratives in our mind. For example, if we take the challenge of like feeling unworthy of love, that deep transformation doesn't happen simply by creating a narrative that, oh, I am worthy of love, or just like saying it all the time, or trying to remind ourselves, or having people around us remind ourselves that, in fact, a sense of unworthiness, exactly that, is a sense, it's a sensation, it's sensory, it lives in the body, it's a somatic experience, that it's not just a narrative or thoughts or cognitive, that something is being mirrored in the body that continues to reproduce the narrative. So if we think of like unworthiness, or feeling insecure, or like I'm not lovable, we can notice something maybe that's happening in the shoulders, right? So there's a collapsing in. It's very common for women to have a more collapsed state, where the shoulders are rounded in, the neck is small, the head is sort of leaning, the legs are very close together. This is a very common shape that humans take to sort of shrink themselves and make themselves look appeasing and innocent and how can I say it? Unharmful.
Almost
right? Like
acceptable,
it's very
acceptable, like to tread gently,
exactly,
not have too much of an impact.
Yeah. We're trying to communicate something through this body language. Like, you don't have to worry about me. I'm very kind. I'm very innocent. I'm very right. What happens over time is we get really fixed in these states. Yeah. That even when we're in a relationship or in a circumstance where we are being honored, or we're being extended love, that it's actually very hard for us to believe that we are lovable even when love is being extended towards us, because this shape keeps reminding the soma, the psyche, the soul, the body, the mind, that there's something in me that I have to shape myself differently in order to receive love, connection, and belonging. That if I was just myself, and if I took up more space and spread my shoulders and lifted my chin, that there's something too threatening about that. especially as a woman, when we are, I mean, when I say all of this, we cannot take the politics of gender out of it. We cannot take gender shaping and cultural shaping out of it. That women, for the most part, are taught and trained that the more innocent and peaceful and appeasing you look, society will extend you love and belonging. And the more that you look confident in your own skin and in your own body, your chin is raised, your chest is relaxed, you're leaning back, that something about that is threatening, yeah? And you will not be extended love, connection, and belonging. And this is a story and a narrative that has been reproduced over centuries, right? And what happens is then we embody that and we keep reproducing that in our own bodies. So when I talk about embodied transformation, when I talk about somatic healing, even trauma healing, we are talking about going from this type of shape, for example, just this particular example we're working with, from this appeasement to this, right? Being able to be in my own center, yeah? And from this place, trusting that the right people will love me, that I don't need to contour myself and shape myself and squeeze myself and shrink myself and collapse myself to be lovable, that I can be in my confidence, I can be in my integrity, I can be in my dignity. And if someone is not loving me on the other side because of that, that has nothing to do with me, that's something on them. That's a toxic trait within them that they have to contend with, yeah? And it's very hard to just learn that in the mind. It's very hard to say, I'm going to be in my power or in my confidence, in my integrity, in my dignity as a woman. That in fact, we have to do something here at the body level, at the somatic level, in order to start training ourselves into a new shape, in order to embody a new way of being and relating with other human beings. So that is what the work is about.
Okay.
We look at what the current embodiment is and how the narratives that we have show up in our body, show up in our language, show up in the way that we interact with other beings. And then we go, is that serving me? What about that is actually society's training of me that has me stuck in a pattern that I can see is not a pattern that I want to embody anymore. I want to embody something else. So that's the work of embodied transformation, of somatic healing, of trauma healing. It's going from an old shape to a new shape that has new options from where we can make new choices, from where we can experience ourselves differently and therefore be more discerning in our relations with other people.
Thank you. Okay, so from what I understand you saying is that the process is making the client aware of her physical stature and how that physical stature is linked to whatever her opinions subconsciously or consciously or unconsciously. And then by doing somatic work and changing the physicality, the physical aspect, they can impact things on an emotional level or even deeper. And if that's a situation, what would be that process? If you could maybe, give us some kind of a run through for those of us who are totally unfamiliar with what that means.
Sure. There's a sort of arc of, we call it the arc of transformation, right? Like, what do we have to go through? What are the sort of chapters of the process before we can arrive to something called a new shape or a new embodiment? And we always begin with longing. What are you longing for? How do you long to be? What are the qualities of being you long to embody? And women, for the most part, already know it, right? Right away, they'll tell you, I want to be more confident. I want to be able to use my voice under challenging circumstances, and when the heat rises, my voice closes up and I can't speak anymore, and right, and I don't know what to say, and I get flustered, and there's like a lack of confidence. I want to be able to speak. I want to be able to, my voice to feel free. Women will tell me, I want to be able to say no. You know, when someone asks me this or that of me, or I want to be able to say no. It's so hard for me to say no. Again, the shape of appeasement is a yes shape. Sure, no problem. Mashi, that's, yeah, anytime, my pleasure, you're welcome. How often do we hear women saying, no, thank you. No, not this time. That's too much work for me. I'd rather not. I'll pass this time. Can we embody no, from center, from confidence? Women will tell me, I long to take care of myself with no guilt. When I take a nap, I don't want to feel guilty that I took a nap. When I go get a massage, I don't want to feel guilty that I spent money on a massage, whatever it might be. Women carry so much guilt when it comes to self-care and putting themselves first. And they long to care for themselves without the guilt, without the added baggage. So on and so forth. We always start with longing. What are you longing for? And that starts to create the frame, the North Star, the map. It starts to create the map of where we're going. Once we have an idea of the map and where we're headed, then we start to look at what is the current embodiment as it is today. Under pressure, what happens when that heated conversation in the room starts to happen? Can you feel your voice start to close? Can you notice that you're shrinking back? Can you notice that your shoulders are collapsing? All to make yourself small and sort of disappear yourself in this moment. Yeah. So we just become aware. And this is the phase of somatic awareness. Awareness, awareness, awareness. This part deeply involves inhabiting the body. Yeah. So even before we get to somatic awareness, we can't be aware of what's happening in our body if we're not in our body. So as a primary starting point, we spend a lot of time coming back to the body. In modernity, we live in a time where there's a deep separation between mind and body. For the most part, because of Cartesian philosophy, we have this sense of, I think, therefore I am. That the body is just this thing, this physicality that's carrying around the most important part of us, and that's the mind, the intellect, the place of reason, the place of rationing and rationale. And for the most part, we have been taught in our modern capitalistic society to treat our body as a thing, yeah, objectify it, and we just have to feed it and use the bathroom and go to sleep. And for the most part, we don't actually feel our body until something is wrong, until there's pain. Oh, my back hurts is the first time we actually feel ourselves during the day. So much of this work is built on the foundation of re-embodiment. Can we feel ourselves from the inside out? As we're sitting on this phone call, can we feel our feet on the ground? Can we feel the contact that our bottom is making with the chair? Can we feel our back pressed against the chair? Can I notice that there's warmth and heat running through my body because I'm impassioned and speaking about something that I love? Can I notice that there's a mood of joy as I speak to you? All of this is the work of basic embodiment, feeling ourselves from the inside out, feeling the wholeness and the aliveness. In Chinese medicine or in Eastern traditions, it would be called qi, the vital life force that runs through us. If we are not in contact with our qi, if we are not in contact with our vital life force, we're not in contact with ourselves. We're not in contact with our being, our life force, our spirit, as it manifests in this physical form. And so at the baseline, we have to come back to this body is not a thing. It is not an object that I can just manipulate and objectify and command and order. It has its own wisdom. Yeah, it has knowledge. it has intuition, it has something to say about the way that we're living our lives. And for the most part, we're really, really good at silencing what the body has to say. Most of us, if we look at parts of our lives that were emotionally challenging, there was something somatic that was happening along with it. Maybe our appetite was low, we couldn't eat as much, our sleep was tumultuous. We felt a heaviness in our chest all along during this challenging period. For example, taking divorce as a period. Many of us have somatic experiences when we're going through a phase of grief or separation. But for the most part, we think, oh, that's just when I'm grieving. But every single moment of our lives, something is happening at the bodily level that is deeply connected to the emotional, that is deeply connected to the spiritual, and that is also deeply connected to what is happening in the mind. And unless we come into alignment, where we align our mind, body, spirit, where we experience ourselves as a whole being, not separate parts that are floating around and doing different things, but as one soma that acts in unison, then we really can't go much further. So much of the path, that the arc of the transformation, the arc of the healing, starts by feeling ourselves from the inside out, noticing that vital life force, the chi that is running through us all the time, connecting with it, getting deeply and intimately familiar with it. And from that place, we can start to notice our embodiment. Oh, wow. When there's a social pressure that's happening, when there's pressure in the room, my chi starts to lock up and tighten right here in my throat, right here in my solar plexus, right here in the belly. Once we become aware of that, we can take on somatic practices. And this is the next part of the arc. We go from somatic awareness to somatic practices that help us move that energy of that contraction. We can physically, through practices, notice the lumps, the places where energy is getting stuck, and we can move it to our extremities. We can recycle it to the tips of our fingers, recycle it to our toes, let it move through the body. The energy of fear has a particular inward, inside solar plexus under the rib cages. If we are aware of that and we notice when we are in fear, there's an inward and a pulling in that happens, then we can, with intentionality and with practice, start to learn how to move it outward. The energy of anger is upward, it's yang. It moves up and it moves very fast and it's hot. If we are aware that when we're angry, something is starting to move up, something is getting me out of my seat. SubhanAllah, we can look at the Sunnah of the Prophet, when you're angry, if you are standing, sit. If you are sitting, lay. What's happening in that? What is the wisdom of that? The chi and the energy of anger is upward. So the practice of working with anger is to bring it downward. Sit down, lay down, bring yourself physically down in order to bring the chi of anger, the energy of anger, back to a yin state, back to a balanced state. So we start to work with these types of somatic practices. When you're angry, can you notice the anger? Can you change your positionality and come down? When you're in fear or insecurity, can you just start to gently open the shoulders, relax the breath, lean back, and notice how this contraction that we think is inevitable, we're like, I'm always going to be this way, it's never going to change. In fact, just a little bit of attention, awareness, and the practice, right? That physical somatic practice starts to make incredible impact on our lives. And finally, we get to something we call somatic opening. Somatic opening is a phase of the work or a part of the work. I don't want to talk about it in a linear way because it's very iterative. We keep, subhanAllah, the adhan is going on. I don't know if it's impacting the voice too much.
No, I can't really hear it. Yes, you were talking about somatic opening.
The best way I can talk about this part of the process, or yeah, is that somatic opening, I guess, deeply recognizes that these contractions that we hold, this shaping that we have, whatever it might be, didn't just happen overnight. That we've been practicing something, we've been attempting to survive in this particular way over many, many, many years. And that inside of these contractions are really deep emotional stories and sometimes trauma that need to be recognized and released. Yeah, so when we were talking about fear or insecurity having a particular shape, right? Usually it's happening like in the center of the body, in the belly or the solar plexus. That is an old contraction that needs to be held, acknowledged, and opened and released in order for us to make room and space for new embodiment to take, to seed, to root. It's almost like tilling a garden. Yeah, if the soil is sort of deprived of nutrients, and we want to put new seeds, we wouldn't just put new seeds in that soil. We would do something to aerate the soil, to till it, in order to have new life be able to come through. And that's exactly what we're doing inside of somatic opening. It's a process where we use body work, we use touch, and also attention and storytelling in order to help open and release these contractions that have been fixed in place for many years, sometimes for decades. And then when we like open these contractions and make room and release them, then our new practices that we're trying on, the new shape really has a place to take root. It's like we're making space in our body for something new to happen. So we use, again, storytelling, we use body work and touch, we use breath work to release old contractions in order to make room for new shaping, new embodiment. So that's the process of somatic opening. And between these three, between somatic awareness, somatic practices, and somatic opening, we really start to see a transformative process take place. That once we become deeply, deeply aware of our current shape and our current embodiment, and we start to try on new practices under pressure, we actually simulate pressure in order to be able to practice these new things under the simulation of what real life might look like. Yeah.
It's like retraining the body.
Exactly. And finally, somatic opening that helps us heal some of these wounds that have been with us for so many years. We start to transform. Our body starts to transform. Our shape starts to transform. The way we relate, the way we speak, the way we pace ourselves inside of a heated argument, for example, all of that really starts to deeply change. And with that, our mindset, our narratives, the things that we say to ourselves, the way that we relate to ourselves also starts to transform. So that's a little bit about the process of embodied transformation, somatic healing. Really, these things are synonymous and interchangeable. That's what we're talking about here. It's an alternative to therapy. It's an alternative modality. It's considered a holistic healing modality, and it's holistic again because it brings together the mind, body, spirit, brings them in unity as we attempt to transform and change our lives.
Okay, thank you so much. And do you have any take-home practical tips that women who are watching this can implement and do? Somatic steps that, if there are, anything that would be beneficial for them to apply immediately.
Yeah, one of the core practices that I use in order to bring women back into their bodies to feel the chi and the life force is a centering practice where we center inside of 4 dimensions. We're 3-dimensional beings, and in fact, we have a 4th dimension to us. So the way that we do the centering practice is either seated or standing. First, we pull our attention inward. So much of our attention is outward. With the eyes, we're looking outside. And so our attention goes where our eyes go. And for the most part, so much of our attention is outward that we don't really feel ourselves for most of the day. We're just like, oh, what's happening there. And many, many hours might go by and we don't even notice what's happening in our bodies. So the first part of the practice is just pulling the attention inward to sensation, which is the language of the body. And it's our first and our primary language, in fact. Yeah. We pull our attention to sensation to notice temperature. Where are places you feel hot? Where are places you feel warm? Where do you feel cool? So temperature is something we can notice. We can also notice movement. So tingling, streaming, buzzing. An easy place to do that is in the hands. There's a lot of chi that's often running in the hands. So simply placing the attention in the hands, we can notice, oh, wow, my hands are like bubbling or buzzing. We can also feel our face. We have so much activity and muscle happening because we're speaking and smiling and blinking that if we just still the muscles in our face for 5 seconds, we can notice there's movement there. There's chi. There's a sense of streaming. So that's another way, another sensation to be aware of. Again, temperature and then movement, buzzing, streaming, tingling. Finally, sensation can show up as pressure. There are places in the body where we can feel a type of holding, a pulling in. We can also say contraction. There's a particular tightness that happens in kind of the usual suspects, the chest, the lower back, the jaw, the eyes. Yeah, so we can notice pressure in these places and just use the breath to release some of that pressure. And then the opposite of holding is openness. Yeah, there are places in the body that actually feel like, oh, wow, there's space here. There's room here. So noticing pressure is also noticing the opposite of pressure, is openness and space, spaciousness. So as we pull the attention inward to sensation, it's like we're already coming to life. Like, wow, there's so much movement in my body. There's so much I could be aware of if I just paid attention to it. And once we're there, once we're in the place of open and directed attention into the sensation and the life force of the body, we can center ourselves in 3 directions. First, we can center in our length. Yeah, for the most part, we're not very aware of our length. We're often collapsed in our length, not really inside of our full length. So this is a place where we can just bring ourselves upright, feel our weight down, like we're surrendering to gravity, not fighting gravity all the time, but surrendering to gravity, dropping the shoulders, dropping the hips, bending the knees. When the knees are locked, if you imagine like this is the kneecap, when the knees are locked, we're actually fighting gravity. But the second we bend the knees just a little bit, we allow ourselves to settle into gravity more. So from this place of settled rootedness, we can then feel the length of our upper body, bringing our spine, just creating a little bit of space in the spinal cord. So you can feel the vertebra of your spine, and you can notice when you're collapsed and crunched, then the space is crunched. And if you just lift yourself a little bit, you create a little bit of space in the vertebra of the spine, as if there's like a rope at the top of your head, very gently pulling you upward. And here we look for the balance. Yeah, as humans, as upright beings, we are always in a dynamic tension between earth and heaven. Yeah, between what is below and what is above. And we are intended to exist in this dynamic tension. We are intended to be both very rooted with our feet planted on this earth, and yet also looking upward and feeling for what is above and higher, God, the divine, sky, the universe. Yeah. So can we be in relationship with both at the same time? And we don't do that theoretically, we do that somatically by planting our feet, settling into gravity, and then bringing ourselves upright. Inside of this structure of a length, you can also feel our dignity from the inside out. Length is the place of dignity. Uprightness is the experience of dignity. So we just connect to length, to dignity. And then we center in the second dimension, which is our width. Yeah. This is a place where it's very common to shrink and collapse ourselves, to make ourselves small. So width is a place where we can connect to, wow, how wide does my body actually go? How far do my feet need to be in order to support the structure of my body? In soft martial arts, and in fact, in any traditional martial arts, unless your feet are beneath your hips and beneath your shoulders, you're not properly supporting the structure of your body. Unfortunately, because of deep social conditioning, women often are putting their feet together and standing with their feet so close that if you just, pushed, you'd topple over. And this is social conditioning of like, close your legs, bring your legs together. You have to be small, you have to be petite. And in fact, it's really unhealthy for our bodies to stand that way. That is the healthiest way for us to stand and be is for our feet to be just underneath our knees to be just underneath our hips, our shoulders to be over our hips. That's the proper structure of the body. And especially when women start to open themselves up in their width, they notice all the times that they shrunk, all the times they collapsed, all the times they pulled themselves in, because that was the socially acceptable thing to do. So just that alone, centering in your width, feeling the side to side of you, stepping your feet out to support the structure of your body, letting yourself unfurl, unfold like a book that's closed and it wants to open is a really powerful experience and a powerful practice. Yeah. So width, length, width, and finally depth. Yeah. We have a back body, we have insides, we have a front body. Unfortunately, this capitalistic world we live in has us so worried about the future, running after this errand and that errand and having to get things done, that we're pulled out of our back body. We're so forward that often we're here, yeah? And we're forgetting this back body. So centering in depth asks of us to be in a balanced state, neither too far back, neither too far forward, just there in the center. So when we're on our feet, we can feel the balance. We rock back in our heels, we rock into our toes, and we just notice like, wow, where am I usually? And for the most part, people are on their toes. Like this expression on your toes is not, it's coming from somewhere, right? And so we rock back and forth and we find what's the balance of my depth. Can I be in the center of my depth where I feel my back, my history, I feel my insides, this present moment, and I can also look into the future without forgetting what's behind me. Yeah, it's a very integrating experience to center in depth, to feel that as we move forward into our future, we can't ignore what came before us. Yeah, we can't ignore the past or somehow shun it or leave it behind. I'm not an advocate of starting over. I'm not an advocate of this sense or this idea that we could just, leave what happened and then start something new. That in fact, everything that we've experienced must and is always at our back. Yeah. So depth helps us feel into that. History, present, future, centered in our depth. And finally, once we're here in our length, and our width, and our depth, we can bring in the fourth dimension, and that's coming back to longing. What do we long for? What do we care about? What are we moving towards? What is this part of our healing that wants to emerge? Yeah, what wants to heal next? And when we speak that to ourselves, when we put that to words, it is incredible what happens in the body. This is the mind-body alignment. This is what happens when we are so deeply in the awareness of our body and paying attention to sensation and our soma, that when we speak what we care about, we notice that something is happening inside of us, that maybe the tingling that we felt becomes even more pronounced. Maybe we want to widen even more and we feel the sensation of expansion. Maybe we feel even more dignified and upright in our stance. We feel the depth and the history at our back. All of that together, being in our body and bringing to mind what it is we're moving towards, that is the basic centering practice. And in fact, it's not basic at all. If you do this centering practice day after day, 5 times a day, 3 times a day, you'll start to become aware of your soma, aware of the aliveness of your body, aware of when something is shifting and changing, when your mood changes, there's also something happening at the level of the body. So this centering process, this centering practice is not only a somatic practice, or it's also a practice of awareness. So it brings together somatic awareness, somatic practice, and it also can be very opening. It can be very healing the first time you step from your feet being so close to this. It can be very healing the first time you take yourself out of being so forward and worried and you just lean back and notice, wow, I have the capacity to lean back and to sit back and not be so anxious and forward in my life. So all of this can be very opening, very healing, which is why I love it as a primary and pretty advanced practice to take on.
Thank you so much, Iman. That is very useful. And in closing, is there anything that you would like to say to our viewers, our community in general? Any general advice?
I'll just say that the body is so wise. And the more that you get to know your body, the more you get to know yourself. So take the time to get to know your body. Take the time to feel yourself from the inside out. It's one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done in my life. And it's had a tremendous impact in my life. And I just wish everyone healing and wellness.
Yes, I relate to so much to what you're saying, because just recently in my life, I discovered Qigong. And so everything that you're saying about being aware of your stance and about feeling the chi and about the balancing and being not too much forward, I can relate to all of that. And you think, man, like I was missing out on this in all these years, but rather, it's never too late, right? To create the awareness. And it's so beneficial. It's so grounding. And as a person who I've always found it difficult to do a sitting silent meditation, what I love about this kind of thing is that it's almost like meditation in movement. So, which is very remedial and beneficial. So, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. And I do hope that we can connect with you again in the future, inshallah.
I hope so too. Thank you for having me.
All the best. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.